Apologists are always at work forcing the Bible into a contemporary context, at the expense of removing it from its native one. For example, modern apologists believe the book of Job accurately gives scientifically accurate descriptions of our universe, descriptions which could not have been known to any ancient author unless guided by divine inspiration. Such apologists often point to Job 38:31, for instance, and claim the passage rightly describes the Pleiades as a cluster of stars held together by gravity, and the stars of Orion as having no gravitational relationship to one another. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Facts about these astronomical bodies were not known until the 20th century. While modern apologists interpret this passage as an example of the remarkably accurate scientific insight of Job's author, apologists prior to the modern era, without the scientific knowledge regarding the stars of Pleiades or Orion, interpreted Job 38:31 differently, but with the same force of certitude over its meaning. Julian of Eclanum, an early church bishop of the 5th century, wrote regarding this verse, "Since in ordering the complexity of the world, providence did not lack the collaboration of power, Job now enumerates those things that evidently are an integral part of the power of the Creator. Another interpretation: even though the amount of space between them might be small, your strength will never be able to accomplish this, that is, to force them together into a single place and location, after removing whatever it is that makes them distinct. Neither will you be able to change the turning about of Arcturus, and move it to a location or region different from the one that I have set." For the apologist Julian, whose belief included a fixed universe with heavenly bodies and constellations that never change, Job 38:31 was referring to the absolute placement of such stars as those that make up the cluster of the Pleiades or the constellation of Orion, without the slightest concept of gravitational forces. Modern apologists conveniently overlook the remainder of the Jobian passage, which goes on to mention other constellations. Verse 32 names Ursa Minor, as well as what scholars believe is a reference to the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season, or can you guide the bear with its children? These references are not at all remarkable in any sort of scientific sense. In the context of the passage, however, all these configurations of the heavens serve to drive a point home. Human beings could not have placed the stars where they are in the sky, nor can they ever move them from their current places. Julian had no concept of gravitational forces, nor could he have known that physics and the passage of time would indeed eventually move the stars of the Pleiades and Orion from their current places to regions of space far removed from one another. Julian was standing far closer to the original context of Job 38:31, a verse meant to describe the fixed nature of the heavens in an ancient cosmology. How God alone controls this perfect, unchanging, and unchangeable pattern of the universe than anything today's apologists have cooked up to reinterpret the verse to describe facts regarding these stars as discovered by modern science. As Gerald H. Wilson notes in the International Biblical Commentary on Job regarding Job 38:31, the focus on human powerlessness is immediately clear. The ability to bind and loose is evidence of power to control. Pleiades and Orion are two constellations of stars that are beyond the reach of human control and manipulation. God treats the stars like domesticated animals, binding them together like oxen into constellations, or loosing them to wander alone as he wishes. Humans can only look on with amazement as God works in the distant heavens. There certainly is nothing in Job 38:31 to suggest knowledge, divinely inspired or otherwise, of gravitational forces at work in deep space. When reading apologetic treatments of Job, which claim remarkable scientific accuracy for the book, one often finds apologists reaching far beyond what the text allows, and often being dishonest with the narrative. Some apologists assert, for example, that Job 38:7 is poetically describing radio waves being emitted by stars and galaxies. The morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. Apologist Ray Comfort notes in his interpretation of Job, in his so-called Evidence Bible, endorsed by other apologists like Norman Geisler, D. James Kennedy, Tim LaHaye, Ken Ham, and Josh McDowell. Science has discovered that stars emit radio waves, which are received on Earth as a high pitch. God mentioned this in Job 38:7. Apologist Henry Morris asserts a similar interpretation. An anticipation of astrophysics is the reference in Job 38:7 to the morning stars singing together at the foundation of the earth. This verse perhaps hints of modern radio astronomy, which uses radio telescopes to measure signals from distant galaxies instead of optical telexes recording starlight. Such apologetics demonstrate the lengths apologists will go to strain the biblical text into meaning whatever they can force it to mean for their own apologetic purposes. Neither of these assertions regarding the interpretation of Job 38:7 is correct, however, in the native context of the passage. These apologists fail to mention, or quickly gloss over, that the singing morning stars and shouting angels were in response to God's creation of the earth. In the text, God has been describing to Job how he had laid the foundations of the earth, sinking them into the primordial waters. The completion of this constructive work is then met with a mythological celestial choir, rejoicing in the labors of the Lord. A similar description is found in Proverbs 8, where a personified wisdom also is said to delight in God's creation of the world. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master worker, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing in his inhabited world. As David Klein notes in the World Biblical Commentary on Job 38:7, the start of a great work or a great building deserves celebration, as does its completion. So when the foundation of the second temple was laid, there was music and singing according to Ezra 3, verses 10 and 11. Similarly, the finishing of Solomon's temple was celebrated with music and song according to 2 Chronicles 5:13. Klein also notes that celebration at the completion of buildings can also be found in other ancient Near Eastern literature, for example in the Enuma Elish following the building of Babylon as a sanctuary for the gods, and in the Ugaritic Baal myth upon completion of Baal's temple. The morning stars and angels are merely attendants in God's heavenly court, who witnessed the construction of the earth and sang songs of joy and praise at its completion. There is certainly nothing here to even remotely suggest radio waves being emitted by stars in distant galaxies, or of modern radio astronomy. In 1981, scientists discovered a huge void in space in the direction of the northern hemisphere. The universe has a huge hole in it that dwarfs anything else of its kind. The discovery caught astronomers by surprise. The hole is nearly 1 billion light years across. It is not a black hole, which is a small sphere of densely packed matter. Rather, this one is mostly devoid of stars, gas, and other normal matter, and it's also strangely empty of the mysterious dark matter that permeates the cosmos. Other space voids have been found before, but nothing on this scale. This empty space was found combing the skies above the northern hemisphere. For some apologists, like Fred Williams, this discovery was already made in Job 26:7, which reads, "God stretched out the north over the empty place." Fred Williams is a creationist who co-hosts a Christian radio program titled Real Science Radio with apologist and pastor Bob Enyart on Denver's 670 AM station KLTT. The program had previously been known as Real Science Friday, but Enyart changed the name of the show to settle a lawsuit filed by NPR against both Enyart and Williams for trademark infringement when the title of his show too closely matched the NPR program Science Friday. Fred Williams, also a member of Rocky Mountain Creation Fellowship, has asserted this recent discovery of a huge hole in space in the direction of the Northern Hemisphere helps illuminate the divine nature of Job 26:7. But again, apologists like Williams who make such an assertion are either woefully ignorant of the biblical text or are deliberately trying to misrepresent it. The Hebrew word translated north in the passage is Zephon, and refers to the mythological Canaanite mountain of the gods, very much like the Greeks' Mount Olympus. What is being described here in the 26th chapter of Job is a version of the ancient Hebrew myth concerning the creation of heaven and earth. In the opening verses of 26, Job describes the realm of the dead, Sheol, the underworld, and abode of the shades, as well as the vast ocean which were believed to exist beneath the earth. The shades below tremble, the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. Abaddon was another name for the realm of the dead. Job goes on then to focus attention on the sky above, noting how God has stretched the sky, a solid canopy, over the earth, and hung the earth over the void. As John Hartley noted in the New International Commentary on the Old Testament, the Book of Job, God, like a sheik pitching a tent, created the world. He stretches out the north over the watery chaos, and he hangs the earth over the great void. The worldview behind this imagery must be interpreted from the author's perspective. North, in this context, is not a direction but a spatial term for the high heavens, the place of God's throne. Standing after the verb stretched out, it occurs in place of the usual term heavens. This position is further supported by the fact that earth, which is often coupled with or parallel to heavens, here stands parallel to north. In Ugaritic mythology, the north was the place where the divine assembly gathered, and Mount Zephon was a dwelling place of Baal, the chief god. Borrowing from this imagery, some Old Testament passages use the term the north to refer to the place where God reigns supreme. In Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 14, it is clear that the north is used symbolically, not geographically, for God's habitation. In this passage, then, the north, the highest height, is opposite of Sheol and Abaddon, the lowest depths. The void of verse 7, then, is not a sector of space in which few stars or galaxies can be found, seen relative to the northern hemisphere of the Earth through our most powerful telescopes, but is instead the great depths of the primordial waters over which God laid the earth and stretched the solid canopy of the sky in ancient Hebrew cosmology, as described in the narrative of Genesis 1. Apologists who believe the verse instead hints at a great scientific insight do so only to further a specific agenda. Until relatively recently, astronomers and physicists were unaware of a strange substance which virtually floods our universe: dark matter. However, apologists for the scientific accuracy of Job claim the author of the book already knew of this strange substance. Some apologists claim Job 38, verses 19 and 20, correctly states that darkness is a real substance, residing in specific locations in the universe. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Apologist Hugh Ross has asserted,
there's a question that God poses in the 19th and 20th verses of Job 38. He says, "Where does darkness reside? Can you take it to its places? Do you know the paths to its dwellings? Well, when I was a young student, I was taught by my physics professors that darkness was simply the lack of light. But notice here that God is saying in Job something very different. He's implying that darkness is a substance. It's not just the lack of light, it's an actual, real substance. And it's got a location. It's got a particular geography where it resides. Well, it's only been in the last 18 months that we scientists have been able to demonstrate that everything that God said in Job 38, 19, and 20 is correct. And for example, we now have an accurate inventory of what makes up the universe. We know that a substance called dark energy, which is a self-stretching property of the space surface of the universe, where everything in the universe resides, makes up 72.1% of all the stuff of the universe. So darkness is the dominant component of the universe. Exotic dark matter, which is stuff like neutrinos that doesn't interact well with light, makes up 23.3% of the universe. And then ordinary dark matter, which is stuff that we're used to, protons, neutrons, and electrons, that is in such small dimensions, typically dust and tiny pebbles, makes up 4.35% of the universe. And then stars and stellar remnants makes up 0.27%, and where we reside on the planets make up only 1/1,000,000th of all the stuff of the universe. Now, that means that this dark stuff makes up 99.73% of all the stuff of the universe. That's why God talked about the darkness in Job 38. He was tipping us off. It's the dominant component of the universe. And we also now know that this quantity of the dark stuff gives us the most spectacular evidence for supernatural design. If you were to ask me as a scientist, what's the best scientific proof you have for supernatural, superintelligent design? It's this dark stuff. But Job 38 also goes into the location of this dark stuff and makes the point that we now know where the dark stuff resides. The dark energy resides on the cosmic surface. I've already said that. The exotic dark matter resides in giant halos around galaxies and galaxy clusters. You can't see the light, of course. There is no light. It's all dark, but we can see its gravitational influence. And the ordinary dark matter resides in close-in halos around galaxies. If my fists were a Milky Way galaxy, you were to go about a factor of 10 farther out, you would see this halo of ordinary dark matter. If you go a factor of 100 out, you see an even bigger halo of exotic dark matter. And what we now know is it takes that quantity and specific location of that exotic dark matter and ordinary dark matter in order to stabilize the spiral structure and keep it so symmetrical as it has been in our Milky Way galaxy, both of which are critical requirements for advanced light to be possible in our Milky Way galaxy. And so if you were to ask me, what is the second best scientific evidence we have for supernatural, superintelligent design, I would have to tell you it's the location, the placement of the exotic dark matter, ordinary dark matter, and dark energy. Now this is all stuff that we discovered, some of it just 7 months ago, some of it as much as 18 months ago. So this is an example where the book of Job is right up to date here in the 21st century. And how making that discovery of the existence of the dark stuff and the location of the dark stuff has yielded us a powerful new tool to persuade people that there must be a God out there who is Creator, Lord, and Savior.
But, as is often the case with apologetics, the original context of the verse they are lifting from the book of Job is abandoned in their zeal to advance their particular agenda, and they claim far more for the biblical text than the text itself will allow. Where in Job 38 does it say darkness is the dominant component of God's creation? Where does it speak of darkness residing around galaxies and galaxy clusters? Where are galaxies mentioned at all in the book of Job, or anywhere else in the Bible? In the preceding verses of chapter 38, God is questioning Job on his knowledge of the creation. God speaks about the light of dawn, how it spreads across the earth. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? As well as the darkness in the deepest recesses of the sea. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? These are the dwelling places of light and darkness spoken of in 38, 19, and 20. The dawn, or first light, has a dwelling place beyond the horizon of the flat, circular-shaped earth from which it rises in the morning and spreads itself across the jagged landscape. It is a place beyond the reach of mortals like Job. Darkness dwells in the recesses of the deep, near the gates of the dead. This is the original context of Job 38, verses 19 and 20, not the invented, self-serving context of the modern apologist. The idea of light and darkness having fixed abodes is also reflected in Job 26:10. He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. The horizon itself acts like a boundary between the abodes of light and darkness in ancient Hebrew cosmology. This, of course, echoes the creation story of Genesis 1, in which it is stated, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness." This idea of light and darkness being separate from one another as having separate domains or abodes reflects ancient Hebrew ideas about the world, not any modern discoveries of dark matter or dark energy residing outside galaxies or between galaxy clusters. Dark matter does not exist as some sort of entity separate from light. Dark matter is merely a type of matter hypothesized to account for a large part of the total mass in the universe, as visible matter cannot account for the total mass. It is dark insofar as it neither emits nor absorbs light or other electromagnetic radiation. It could just as easily be called invisible matter. Were it coined as such, apologists wouldn't be able to make this strained connection with Job 38. Many apologists, trying to strain amazing scientific accuracy out of the biblical text, bring attention to Job 9:8. He alone stretches out the heavens, and claims this is evidence that the ancient author was inspired by God to write about the expansion of our universe.
The book of Job is the first book in the Bible that talks about God continuously expanding the universe from the very beginning of creation, where he creates space, time, matter, and energy, to where the universe is now sufficiently expanded that stars, galaxies, and planets like Earth can be formed. Notice, too, that no scientist even hinted at the idea that we live in a continuously expanding universe until the 20th century. Albert Einstein was the first to suggest that we live in a continuously expanding universe. But for thousands of years, the Bible was on record, and it was uniquely on record. It was literally the only book of theology, of science, or philosophy that stated that we live in a continuously expanding universe. Today, we know Job got it right. Job uniquely predicted future scientific discoveries.
However, as John Pilch notes in his Cultural Handbook to the Bible, a concordance search of the Revised Standard Version of the Bible discloses that the word sky appears 12 times, but the word heaven, heavens, occurs 750 times. Both English words translate the same Hebrew and Greek words. The English word heaven carries so many centuries of theological freight that a reader does well to avoid it and use sky unless completely implausible in context. So when reading Job 9:8, one must keep in mind that the biblical author was writing within the framework of an ancient Hebrew cosmology. As Pilch further explains this biblical view of the universe, the earth is a flat saucer resting on pillars covered by a dome on the other side of which are waters. There is water in an underworld beneath the saucer too. The ancients agreed that this universe was a closed system, enclosed by a vault or firmament. The high god or gods lived on the other side, and there was an opening that allowed access to the other side. That opening, of course, was located over the place where the deity's temple on earth was located. In the Israelite tradition, this was Jerusalem. Jesus had to ascend to heaven from Jerusalem, since the whole was there, and not in Galilee. John the seer on Patmos and Ezekiel the prophet in Mesopotamia could travel through that opening by means of experiences in altered states of consciousness. So the heavens being stretched by God in Job 9:8 is actually the solid canopy of the sky overhead, a description of the Hebrew word for the dome, rakia, or, as in the King James Version, firmament. Rakia is the noun form of the root word raka, meaning to beat, stamp, beat out, spread out, or stretch. The idea here was of a solid dome covering the earth, beaten out and stretched by God as ancient artisans would beat out gold, silver, or other precious metals to stretch over idols or other objects. This solid canopy is further described in the book of Job at 37:18. Can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze? Some apologists will try to argue that this is merely figurative language, describing the brightness of the sky when the sun is shining, and not a description of a solid domed canopy. They will point to Job 37:21. Now no one can look at the sun, bright as it is in the skies after the wind has swept them clean, and conclude a mirror best compares the brightness of the sky on a wind-swept day to the painfully bright reflection of light from a cast bronze mirror. This is the apologetic tactic Hugh Ross employs.
But again, Job comes to the rescue. And here it's the young man Elihu who makes the statement, making reference to God. And he says, with reference to God, can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze? And this is actually the text that liberal scholars go to say, see, this is exactly what Genesis 1 is teaching, and of course this is scientific nonsense. But they fail to read on to the 20th verse. If you go on to verse 21, what we see is that Elihu describes this as a metaphor. He says, now no one can look at the sky, bright as it is, no one can look at the sun, bright as it is in the skies, after the wind has swept them clean. Now, the whole point here is that in ancient culture, any time before the Roman era, the brightest thing that you could have in the way of a mirror was a polished brass surface. And the analogy or the metaphor is this: just like you can't look up at the sky and the sun when the wind and the rain has swept that sky clean, and those of you living here in Nebraska sure have had many experiences of that. You get a good rainstorm in the middle of summer, and then you look up at the sky, and when the sun is out there, it will hurt your eyes. In the same way that looking at a polished brass mirror with a bright light behind it will hurt your eyes. It's a metaphor, and here we see Elihu actually defining the metaphor of this brass surface.
But what such an apologist does is deceptively divert attention away from the context of Job 37:18 when drawing their audience's attention to 37:21, hoping they will forget exactly what was said in verse 18. In no sense was 37:18 about the brightness of the sky. If it were, it would have read, "Can you join him in spreading out the skies, bright as a mirror of cast bronze?" But its brightness isn't the property of the bronze mirror being discussed. Verse 37:18 is discussing the hardness of a molten mirror and paralleling that with the ancient Hebrew belief in the hardness of the sky dome. Can you join him in spreading out the skies, hard as a mirror of cast bronze? The apologists making this argument are hiding the context of verse 18 as it is found in the larger context of chapter 37. At this point of the book, Job's friend Elihu is asking Job if he can understand the powerful works of God. Listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. Do you know how God controls the clouds and makes his lightning flash? Do you know how the clouds hang poised, those wonders of him who has perfect knowledge? You who swelter in your clothes when the land lies hushed under the south wind, can you join him in spreading out the skies hard as a mirror of cast bronze? Elihu then goes on to explain that human ignorance cannot begin to understand the things of God. Tell us what we should say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of our darkness. Should he be told that I want to speak? Would anyone ask to be swallowed up? Elihu then compares the futility of approaching God and of God's shining divine magnificence as staring directly into the sun. Now no one can look at the sun, bright as it is in the skies, after the wind has swept them clean. Out of the north he comes in golden splendor. God comes in awesome majesty. It is obvious in context that verse 21 is not speaking of the brightness of the sky, but of the brightness of the sun, while verse 18 is speaking of spreading out the skies. So apologists like Ross are simply wrong in stating that Job 37:18 in any way parallels what is being said in 37:21. The spreading and hardness of the sky is what is being compared to a mirror of cast bronze in verse 18, not the brightness of the sun. It is verse 21 which is comparing the golden splendor and awesome majesty of God with the brightness of the sun, and not mentioning at all the hardness of the sky. The two verses cannot be said to be addressing the same thing. This demonstrates the deception apologists use to trick their audiences into believing the absurd claims they make. They hope and assume no one will actually read the verses in their biblical contexts. The same can be said of Job 9:8, discussed earlier with the reference to spreading out the heavens. The apologist arguing that Job 9:8 refers to the expansion of the universe has carefully lifted the verse out of its native context and forced it into one invented by the apologist himself in order to advance a particular interpretation of the text favorable to his assertion that the passage is divinely inspired and scientifically accurate. In its native context, of course, the verse is anything but scientifically accurate. One need also note that none of these verses lifted from the book of Job actually led to the modern scientific discoveries apologists associate with them, because none of these verses actually describe what the apologists claim they are describing. For example, Hubble did not read Job 9:8 and become inspired to search for evidence of an expanding universe. Hubble made his discovery by reading the universe itself, not the Bible. Reading an expanding universe into Job 9:8 is something apologists do after all the hard scientific work has been done.